Hello, listeners. Happy New Year, and welcome to the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm Chris Holliday.
And Chris, this episode has the potential to get a little bit metatextual. A footnote on that coming, what that means. In that this is the second part, I guess, of an episode which we started a year ago, which itself is reviewing the second part of a musical that was started a year ago. So we are today doing Wicked Part 2, or Wicked for Good, as nobody is calling it on this podcast for the rest of the episode. And we will be talking about the second instalment of the Wicked franchise. Listeners who have not heard our previous episode, please go back down your feed a year ago. You will find all our thoughts on Wicked Part 1, or Wicked, there. And I think maybe we should start with a recap of where we were when we reviewed the series last time, and how we find ourselves now as we get ourselves ready to enter into this second and final instalment, we assume.
Yes. Well, I should say, I mean, you've skirted over a short disclaimer, which is just as our Christmas episode on the Polar Express was recorded actually at Christmas, this is actually the first episode that we are recording of 2026. Or certainly, this episode is certainly post Christmas holidays. The film is out, has been out for a while. It has, to my knowledge, thanks to the internet and other such places, that has done very well in terms of kind of awards nominations and things like this. So I think
box office done pretty well, I think.
Yeah. So we felt that it was a good opportunity to, while we have, as they say, other episodes, quote, in the can, this is a great opportunity to sort of slip in an episode that's perhaps a little bit more responsive and a little bit more, I guess, kind of topical. We're dealing with, as you say, the second part of a very successful franchise that is people are interested in, and there are lots of things to kind of talk about. I had to do a bit of revision on what the first, because I don't know the Oz story or the kind of Oz lore as well as you do, though I have, as I said in the original episode, I have seen the stage play. So yeah, there's a bit of, as I started watching Wicked for Good, I had to remind myself, where are we in the story, but also that I remember us talking about this, that this is a film that's dealing with the second half of the play, when everything seems to be building up towards the end of the first half, and I certainly couldn't remember the second half of the play, and so I was sort of intrigued by there's all of this baggage that kind of comes with it. So we have got some stuff to unpack, and also kind of share our thoughts on whether we thought it was successful. Part 2, I don't know. I've got some thoughts, but we'll go from there.
Yeah. So this, I don't know, this might not be our most rigorous episode, everybody, but hey, the Christmas chocolates are still out. I'm still feeling a little bit sluggish about you lot out there, but let's see at least we can share some thoughts on part 2 in the Wicked franchise overall. Right, so let's do a recap then of both where we are in this metatextual story. So Wicked Part 1, Wicked, the story, the origin story, the prequel of the Wicked Witch of the West, Elphaba, and we found her in the first film at school with Glinda, or now Glinda, the who will normally become the Good Witch, or the Wicked, or the Good Witch of the that's famous in the Wizard of Oz and famous in the Oz stories. And what we watched was the kind of first act of the very successful musical, where we saw that friendship ignite, spark, and then we ended, of course, defying gravity. Now, I don't need to revise the show, because I've seen the show a few times, and I obviously am relatively familiar with my Oz lore. But I did revise what we thought about it by listening to the first few minutes of our podcast. And, I don't really listen to our podcast, surprise, surprise, because I do it. And I don't think people would like the idea of us walking around listening to ourselves do it. But I did listen back, and hey, we're not half bad. In that episode, the basic gist of our opinions, I think, if I distill it, was you started the episode a little bit ambivalent and overwhelmed by all the cheesiness. Yeah. I think I won you over in part, at least by the end of it. I was much more enthusiastic. Your thoughts were kind of about tone and whether the tone was managed properly. And was this meant to be kind of parodic? Was this meant to be comedic? Was it meant to be tragic? Had it successfully managed that? I think I'd managed to get you to a place where you were broadly on board, maybe with some hesitancy, but certainly you seemed more enthusiastic at the end of the episode than you were at the start. I was very enthusiastic throughout, but I did caveat it quite a few times by saying I have always found part one of the stage show to be a far more successful enterprise than part two, which has on the stage huge amounts of problems. So that did tease and set up what we're about to do now, which is part two. Have I basically got where you think you were stood in terms of part one, right? Or do you want to add anything to that before we get into the gist of it?
I think I remember it's the classic thing of the first half of the stage show ends with defying gravity, and there is a sort of sense of, okay, where will the play go from? Where can it go? Where should it go? Has it got anywhere to go after defying gravity? So these were questions that I had as I kind of entered Wicked for Good, and that kind of parodic tone that you talked about, that we sort of discussed in the last episode, or the last episode when we talked about the first part, is there is a whiff at the beginning of this film that chimes with what you said, which is I've written as one of my notes, it feels like an SNL skit about the Wizard of Oz, and I think that comes from three places. The humour more broadly. Bowen Yang, who's Fanny, who's one of Glinda's kind of college friends, who is an SNL performer and kind of he's the comic relief in certainly the early parts of this film and sort of throughout the first part, and also Ariana Grande, who very famously actually. There are a lot of... she's presented SNL and been a very successful guest, but she's also very good at impersonation. So there's a lot of kind of viral videos of her doing impersonations of Hermione from Harry Potter, or Jennifer Lawrence, or whoever it might be. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting... Okay, so how am I going to negotiate a film that I feel like is a comment on the Wizard of Oz? And then I thought, no, and I remember this from the first episode, this sort of, the film, a lot of my notes are, the film just about gets away with this. There are it just about gets away with this. So the whole thing about kind of othering, and I think we talked about the sort of synonymy between kind of greenness and blackness, or greenness and otherness. And actually in this film, the sort of quote unquote ostracization of sort of a queer woman of colour, and then Jonathan Bailey, a kind of queer star, Hollywood star. So the othering of those characters, you sort of think, okay, well, this is kind of classic. Hollywood does this. Hollywood's got a history of othering queer characters. Look at the history of Peter Lorre. Look at kind of any classical Hollywood feature film where villainy equals kind of queerness. And then I thought, oh no, the film gets away with this because the film is about those things. It's about the othering of people that don't fit or have to move through a world that isn't built for them. So a lot of my notes straddle that line between... the film gets away with it. So I was sort of... I remembered that from the first installment and sort of came to this second installment going, right, where can it go from here? And as I said, where is it going to go, and has it got anywhere to go with the kind of culmination, I think, of the previous film of Defying Gravity? This film begins with the separation of Glinda and Elphaba, so they've chosen different paths, but sort of not quite, but there's a hint. Anyway, so that's where we begin. So I was interested in where it would go. I did have to remind myself of some of the characters, but...
Right. So, cards on the table then. Is this a better or worse instalment than the first one?
I think it's... Well, worse is a strong word. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first instalment, but I think that's because of the way that the films are split and the way that the stage play is split. Like it's mirroring the structure. There are parts of this that I enjoyed more, and it won't surprise you to know there are. This is the kind of thing where I would say it and you go, oh yeah, you love a bit of that. That's right up your street, which is the kind of references and the nods to sort of when franchises do that sort of nod thing, especially prequels, when they do that thing that's like kind of a wink to the audience, or there's a bit in Wicked for Good where it obviously has to do it kind of cuts into the action of the Wizard of Oz. So you have the spinning house and you have the ruby
Yeah.
slippers, and you have Dorothy going down the yellow brick road. And I was like, oh, that's a nice little gag. Like they're sort of weaving a story that you
Right.
do know with a story that you don't. And I like the kind of acknowledgement of a broader, like situating the narrative within. Like I suppose it's a kind of puzzle film in that sense, but it's inviting the audience to go, oh yeah, that's the bit in their original film where that happens, and we don't follow the characters in this, we don't follow Dorothy in this film because our interest is not her, and we're looking at something. So I like those kinds of structures. So there are little bits like that which I really liked. I like the opening of the film with the construction of the yellow brick road, and I'd forgotten the way that the characters turn into the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So there are beats of this one that I really liked, but I think cohesively I liked the first one because it is kind of the greatest hits of the Wicked stage show, which is just as the play is organised. So I think I have I think I have more of a favour for the first one. But what about you?
Yeah. Oh, I thought this film was terrible. I think it's bad. I think it's so bad. And I think 90% of the problem is just the stage show. And I've saved this rant for a year now. So now I'm going to have it with you and the listeners. So let's see whose patience ends first. But none of the choices made to adapt what I think is a very problematic second half of the stage show in the film have helped, I would say. So I will give it the small caveat before I go on my demented rant about all the reasons I don't think this works, and how much better the first half is. And I've always thought this about the stage show, but in a way, I'm trying to work out whether I like that they've done this or whether I don't like they've done this. And part of me hates that they've done it because it means that I've had to sort of watch an entire movie of the bit I didn't like about Wicked. But in a sort of odd kind of way, that does mean in a yin and yang way, I just now, after I've done this podcast, I never actually have to watch Wicked Part 2 ever again. And there is a film out there that kind of encapsulates everything that I think is good about Wicked in a movie. So in a part of a way, I'm glad they've done it this way, but it has meant that everything I had mixed feelings on about the stage show is now represented in a 2.5 hour movie of bad choices. And I can go down my list. I won't systematically. Let's see when they come up and where. But I guess to try and give this podcast and this discussion some sort of structure, because I'm too annoyed to do this chronologically, I think. Let's start with the thing that you liked about it. So let's deal with that, which is these references to the Wizard of Oz, which is, to me, that is one of the fundamental weaknesses of the film.
Fair enough.
And so should we start with why? Do you want to do the case for the defence, and then I'll do the case for the prosecution as to what's satisfying about those moments.
Okay. I mean, I don't.
We should just say for listeners' sake, in case they, I don't know, watch the film over too much turkey and can't quite remember it. One of the fundamental differences about this film versus the first is that this one is almost superimposed onto the story of the Wizard of Oz, at least the MGM classic, right? So it's almost like Pulp Fiction Wizard of Oz. There's loads of like bits where there's a Dorothy in the corner somewhere doing stuff, and we get to see what happens around the corner. Just so the structure of the movie is much more kind of poke behind the curtain. Let's see what's happening whilst the Wizard of Oz is happening, and we get that kind of playing out. Whilst of course the first film is all kind of backstory and all this kind of stuff. So that's what we're talking about. Whether this is successful or not. Over to you.
Okay. No, that's actually really helpful. I mean, I should also say to listeners, normally we have a bit of a debrief. I didn't know you didn't like it, so this is new. This is all news to me. So anyway, that distinction is important. The first film does the job that a good prequel should do, and I think that was when we watched that. We then recorded one of our episodes on kind of franchises or transmedia. So that first film does some good legwork in getting the spectator up to speed, playing with references to the Wizard of Oz that haven't yet happened within the world of the film, and doing the job that a prequel can and sort of should do, and obviously culminates with Defying Gravity, and we're often running. I suppose I what the film certainly starts with problems. Just before I get to what you just said, which is it does feel like a 4.5, 5 hour film that they have cut in half, but in a way where there is pretty much no exposition at the start of this film beyond the fact that Michelle Yeoh just sort of gives a couple of sentences that Elphaba's now wicked and she's off and running, and then the film just kind of starts. It doesn't. Yeah. It feels like it was cut in two, and it feels disjointed immediately from that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, yeah. In a way, though, I am a little bit. I remember watching the interview with Peter Jackson about the Lord of the Rings, and I don't know if you remember, but the Two Towers starts with a sort of prologue. It's not really, but it sort of revisits a key moment from the first movie, and it was felt the need to do that because the studio said, we obviously need you to do a little like prologue that reminds audiences, and he sort of didn't want to, but he did that as a kind of like gesture. And then by the time it got to Return of the King, he just sort of lost his temper and said, look, is there anyone paying to see this movie that hasn't seen the first two movies? Do we really need to accommodate other than podcasters? Is there anyone out there doing that? And do we need to appeal to that demographic? So I know what you mean about that. I did suddenly go, oh, okay, off we go again.
Yeah.
That isn't on my list of problems, put it that way.
Okay, so a lot of my notes from the first sort of half an hour, I think, are the context for why I didn't mind that. I like the way you put that kind of superimposition, that this film is kind of taking place a little bit before, during, and a bit after. Like it is mapped onto the events. If we were talking about fictional world creation, this is a broad fictional world that's organised itself into a series of stories. The 1939 Wizard of Oz was one story. This is another story taking place in that same kind of fictional world, but it's run Lola run. We haven't followed that pathway. We're now going this pathway, and so I liked for the same reason I like murder mystery stories and TV and sort of going back and seeing the same scene from a different perspective, or that kind of mystery. I quite liked the little nods from a sort of playful, spectatorial. Oh, I see. This is the bit in The Wizard of Oz, and normally the film would follow Dorothy, but actually, no. What we're going to do is spin round and playing really nicely with some of the stuff around. Okay, this is how she got her ruby slippers. This is why this happened. So I liked all of that stuff. Well, the reason I think I liked the gestures to The Wizard of Oz is that the film is really interested in the first 30 minutes with, and I've written here, kind of front and backstage spaces. So there's lots of stuff in the first parts of the film where, and I think it starts with, there's a flashback to Glinda's childhood where she's kind of playing with a wand and she quote unquote conjures but doesn't really a rainbow, and the fellow children are like, oh, did you conjure that rainbow? And she's like, of course I did, even though she didn't. It was a kind of coincidence. And that sense, so a lot of my notes are about the kind of pretense of magic, the production of dissent, so all the stuff around the kind of fake news around Elphaba and all that sort of stuff, and the way that there is this manufacture of the villain and all that sort of stuff. Fiora at one point says they'll believe anything, but then says kind of behind the scene, but I can't stand here pretending to go along with all this. So I quite liked how the film was playing with front and backstage places and spaces and things that some people see and some people don't see. And I thought, okay, that maybe is providing a nice little, like, the film is interested in spaces and different spaces and that kind of stuff. And so I suppose there's a way in which that could be connected to the way that the film is, as you say, we glimpse Dorothy in the background, but that's not our main concern there. So I suppose in that sense, the film is interested about in the man behind the curtain.
Sure.
But also, kind of structurally, it does these nice. I'm a sucker for a visual illusion or a homage, or it's very Pulp Fiction, as you say. You know, Glinda has a Royale with cheese at one point. Like it's all very. But I'm a sucker for that kind of intricacy. I can see why, and somebody who doesn't know the film particularly well, the Wizard of Oz film. You know, I've seen it a few times, but obviously I'm not a super fan. I kind of enjoyed the intertextuality. I think that's at a basic level, because I felt that those kinds of allusions, those intertextual references, didn't seem out of place for a film that is already interested in different kinds of places and images, and the image that you project, and different kinds of spaces, and what you present in one space versus another. So I didn't mind that, but I can see Yes, I'd be interested to know where you thought this went.
Let's. I'll come back to prequels in a second. Let's deal with this idea of I think there is a thematic motif running throughout the film about the way people see things versus the way things actually are, and literally see things. Right? It's it's very interesting in that visual display. And you're right. It's thematically consistent with the original film and the original story, because there's the classic of the pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's very interested in the man behind the curtain, and
the film behind the curtain. I think that's what it is. It's the film behind the curtain. There's the
yes, exactly.
Wicked is the film behind the curtain. I think that's what interested me about the pretense, however successful it is or not. But that's
certainly what it wants to be. This is the film. This was what was actually happening whilst you thought The Wizard of Oz is happening. And there's a few other things like that, right? There are moments where characters deceive people with spectacle, and it's valorized. So, for example, let's skip right to the end. Spoiler alert! But the kind of supposed death of the Wicked Witch of the West. Yeah. This moment of spectacle is a deception. And the film supports that decision. It supports her attempt to kind of escape and be liberated with Fiyero. But it's not. It doesn't support Glinda deceiving, or indeed Michelle Yeoh's character, whose name I have. Yeah, her. She is. If there's a really clear villain of the piece, she is the clear villain of the piece. I mean, the wizard is as well. We'll come to him later, but she is even more of a villain than the wizard, I would say, in the way the film presents this. And her thing is propaganda and deception and mass spectacle. Used to deceive. Yeah, I would say the film. I'm not quite sure the film exactly knows what it's trying to say about the nature of kind of deception, because some character, and when the kind of bit at the end where Glinda kind of becomes Glinda kind of forthrightly and uses her magical pink bubble for good, whilst still realizing she can't actually power it, like that, it likes that compromise, and I'm not quite sure what it's doing with it. That's a minor problem, but I would say nor does the first half really know what it's doing with all its themes. It's kind of just playing with them, isn't it? But you're right. There is a consistency between that kind of let me show you the film behind the curtain and let me show you these moments behind the curtain.
Yeah, but you're right though that there are lots of instances of deception and a kind of false, I suppose what some people might call that kind of rhetorical front. So you have at the start of the film, you have Fiyero and Glinda's sort of marriage that he is kind of unaware of at the start. He's like, "Are we engaged?" But that's sort of to celebrate the opening of the Yellow Brick Road. That's all done as a performance, and then you do have a nice little scene between them where they go kind of behind the curtain and have that conversation. But a lot of the maybe this is a fault of the performance, but a lot of the times they sing songs where it seems like they don't believe the words that they're singing. So I couldn't be happier is a good example of that. But again, I think the film gets away with it because it's clear that the characters aren't agreeing with this, and they're trying really hard to put up this front. But at the same time, you're right that there are, within all these examples of deception, the film is slightly uneven because I've also written that the Ozians they love it, like they love the deception.
Yes.
So it's the classic thing of it isn't necessarily about the way that you vote, but there are people that support people even though other people don't support them, because like people like they are adept at whipping up a kind of frenzy, and so it's sort of showing that this deception is spectacular and works and is persuasive and is convincing and it creates a sense of community, and the Ozians are absolutely on board with this, and it's the outsiders that are drawing attention to the fragility of these deceptions. But yes, I liked the film peeking behind. This is the film that peeks behind the curtain. It's interested in kind of discourses of deception, but part of its discourses of deception, it sort of has to show that these things, people are convinced by this sort of stuff. The Ozians buy into the illusion, and that's how the wizard makes his kind of quote unquote makes his money. Like that's how the deception. So it's almost like it's trying to dismantle something with one hand, whilst also showing that the film is also going, well, this this is successful. Like, deceptions work. Like, the illusion works. I think that's what it is. The illusion works.
So yeah, we will come back to prequels, but other things that I have issues with in this movie are raised by what you just said, which are slightly more pertinent and a bit more easier to address. So I think some basic problems are, Glinda is just unlikable in this movie. Like, there's very little other than right at the end where we kind of get a little bit of redemption. The film wants us to see her conflict. I guess what the film is setting... There's so many things the film could be setting up, but one of the things I'm responding to is that what we have, right, is the radical... What it's trying to do, I think, in terms of our allegiances, you've got kind of... Elphaba is the kind of political radical, uncompromising, ideologically pure, but ostracised, unable to build any kind of movement. There's this scene where she tries to kind of corral the animals into kind of rebellion and sing this song, which I think is an original song for this film. It was not in the stage show, but a similar moment kind of happens in the stage show, and it's just unsuccessful. So she's sort of left in a shack on her own, but ideologically pure. Versus we've got Glinda, who is supposed to be the kind of political pragmatist. She's working within the system. She's, Keir Starmer not wanting to call out Trump. She's, I better not say that out loud, because at least it's better to be inside the tent whispering than it is to be shouting on your own somewhere. The problem is she doesn't really do much whispering, or she doesn't do anything. She just goes along with it. And given that the thing she's going along with is the genocide of the animal population of Oz and the mass deception of its population, it's quite difficult to kind of go, oh, well, yeah. Remember that popular song you sang in the first half? It sets up an ambivalence it thinks it's got away with that I just don't think it has, coupled with the fact that Glinda's, largely a comedic character in the first half. In the first film, in the first half of the play, and here, where's that gone? Where's that lightness of touch? Where's the mirth? It's there in flashes. You mentioned that bit right at the beginning where we kind of get the kind of exaggerated wiggle dance, like in court with the SNL characters. There's a very brief scene where they're brought back together and have like a kind of broom off. And Ariana Grande gets to do some of it, and that raised a chuckle or two, and you're like, oh god, yeah, this, where's this? Like, this is where's the screwball comedy, bickering, loving couple element of the first film gone? Because what we've got instead is this kind of humorless, mirthless waif who isn't doing anything, and yet she's supposed to carry half the movie, and we don't really go. I don't go with it. I don't think audiences go with it.
Is this because the first Wicked is sort of Glinda's film and the second Wicked is Elphaba's film? So they've sort of, these are the part. It sort of
that
follows.
True though?
I don't know. I'm just.
Like,
I don't know.
Would you watch the first movie and say, oh, that was all Glinda's film? I guess Glinda gets some starring out performances, but the film does end with defying gravity, and I don't think I've heard that argument before, or the other way round, right? Yeah, maybe this is Glinda's half, but if it's Glinda's half to learn and go through some character arc and learn some stuff, I'm not quite sure what she learns. And she seems to learn it all in the last 5 minutes if she does learn it.
Her relation, yes, because her relationship with the Wizard of Oz is, I think, even when the first time you meet the Wizard of Oz in this film, which is 45 minutes, an hour in, something like that, there's quite an insidious, like, she's already coupled up with him, like, she's already, like, Glinda's already with the Wizard of Oz, and they sort of stand there and they talk about, if you're with us, you could do this and you could do this, or so they've already created a division between, this is how I'm supposed to read Glinda versus so anything that comes after that. So I think the broom fight comes after that, and they have a brief scene of sort of, how are you? I'm fine. I don't buy that, because I already know the film is interested in deception, so I sort of don't buy anything that comes after that, because I already know that she's very happy with, as you say, this sort of not enslavement, this capture and sort of essentially what it is, dehumanization.
Dehumanized,
These
exactly, yeah.
I have some stuff to say about the human
Great.
and all this sort of stuff, but which we can talk about.
Great.
But yes, there's something quite insubstantial, and I don't think it's necessarily it's not to do with Ariana Grande's performance, because I think she is very good at the material that she's got given in this film, in the way that she's very good in the first film. But she's not given enough of it.
She's not the
doing
problem.
She
was great in the first movie with the stuff that she couldn't absolutely excel at. I'm not sure who excels at this.
This film's a lot more about Elphaba and Jonathan Bailey, Fiera.
Sure.
Which maybe is...
He says, moving down his list.
Which is maybe to the detriment of the film, and maybe the film would have been on surer footing if it had actually kept up the focus on the two, because even Nessa Rose is sort of disposed of quite yes. The Wicked Witch of the East. I know she has to be disposed of by virtue of the law of the narrative, but there's a lot of I don't know. There's just a lot of
yes, who's become a kind of fascist dictator in the last 10 minutes.
Yes, exactly. She's putting up signs about who needs a permit to travel. It's all very 2024, 25. It's all very that sort of but again, I think it's obvious to read that political narrative into it, but it's also because the film is about those things. So, and it wants us to understand that this is how these things work, but the film then disregards Nessa Rose quite, and then there's a really odd. It's the bit. You're right. It's the bit before the broom battle, the kind of lightsaber battle between Dooku and Yoda. It's very odd. It's very odd. She's Glinda's grieving, but not really, about Nessa Rose being flattened by this house.
Yes.
Then Elphaba turns up and says, "Oh, this is very fake." So it's all very insincere. It's all very insincere. I don't know if it's all. I can't quite put my finger on, and maybe it's back to this tone again. It's this shifting tone. Some scenes they want us to read it very sincerely and sentimentally and emotionally and kind of bodily, and then other scenes are played for pretense. And I'm not sure the film gets away with telling us enough about how we're supposed to read each of those things. It doesn't give us enough information to make a decision either way, and so it sort of wavers in the middle. It hesitates, if you will.
And if it were tonally better, I think it would get away with it a lot more. But I think the film. I mean, I've not read any interviews with Stephen Schwartz, who wrote the original play. Again, the play is largely is at fault for a lot of this. Again, the filmmakers haven't done anything to make it better. If anything, they've made it worse. But we'll throw the play under the bus at the same time here. But I'm sure Schwartz would say something like that classic mistake that filmmakers and storytellers in general go down, which is like, it gets very dark in this, it's going to get really, the stakes are going to be really it confuses grimness for substance. I would say the first film is a far more substantial movie by wearing its substance lighter. Because ultimately this is a story set in a world with flying monkeys, big pink fairies. It's as camp as nuts. It's the Wizard of Oz. And I love the Wizard of Oz. That's why we have the gag on the show where I try and mention it every episode. I often cite it when I haven't really got a favourite film, but when you have to answer that question, I often cite it as my favourite film. I love the Wizard of Oz. What I don't need is someone to, quote, take the Wizard of Oz seriously, because I already take it very seriously as the fun, joyful, mirth-giving exercise that it is, and I think this world demands a certain lightness to it. That doesn't mean it can't tackle... let's not go down that road either. Comedies can tackle incredibly important subjects. It's just the idea that, now the stakes are getting real. We really the glass have to dry up now, and we have to really, things are going to get, and usually when that happens, things get less interesting to me.
Is there a moment in the film? Where that kind of shifts? Because it starts off as if it's going to be business as usual. So the
Yes.
sort of introduction, Morrible's introduction as the villain, reintroduction as the villain, but also her relationship with Glinda, where she provides Glinda with the sort of the bubble. And there's a couple of gags about the bubble and stuff. Glinda has a lovely time pressing the button, popping the bubble, it comes back. She's having a lovely time. So it seems like it's going to be on that level. It's going to do what it's, and even if people don't enjoy that as a way of humor, as a type of humor, it's at least consistent in the way that. But then, so I'm trying to think: is there a moment in the film where it flips, or it's maybe it's the forking path where the film takes that wrong turn, and then that's where the issue is. So was there a moment where it kind of went that way?
I mean, the source novel that this is based on, which I've not read, I was planning on actually listening to the audiobook over Christmas, but I ate chocolate instead. So I'm speaking from ignorance here. Scholars of the book can write in and tell us about where we might have got this wrong. But my understanding is it's a much darker quote and far more kind of skewing critique of The Wizard of Oz than certainly the first film or first version. And I can see that being successful. There's no reason it has to not work like that. And I think the desire to keep the basic template of that story perhaps has meant that we're going down this path now, because I'm not quite sure how you do this, because it also would be inappropriate to do gags about animal cruelty and and that's the other thing, right? That musical number, that musical number that you mentioned with the wizard and the two witches, is it wonderful? And it's kind of like the trickster's kind of charismatic, hey, don't worry about it, life is a ball kind of, but the problem is that whilst that kind of represents the wizard's character in the original film, and kind of, it also comes at a point in the narrative where you're like, no, I'm not, like, no, like, you're not a rascal, you're an evil man, like, you've tripped beyond being a bit of a rogue and not actually being a proper wizard to again engaging in severely ethically compromised acts that it's gone beyond the pale, and I'm just not quite sure you tell that story in a way that works here. It's all, I mean, the treatment of the wizard character. I mean, this perhaps gets onto things I'll feel I accept is a bit more subjective, but I don't like it in general when prequels seek to rewrite their source texts. I don't, and part of this is because I'm just a big fan of the original Wizard of Oz, right? So if I hated the original film, maybe I'd be more up for seeing a film which really takes it to pieces. But I don't hate the original film. And I don't think this film hates the original film. It's in love with it, which is another problem, right? It's absolutely in love with the original film, except it wants to kind of devalue everything that it says. And the whole point of that wizard character in the original film is his line, she says, you're a very bad man. And he says, no, dear, I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard. And he's not like, that's not this character. This character is a very bad man. He has no ideological stance, but that doesn't make him a rogue, or it makes him willing to do anything to maintain power and safety for himself, which is not the wizard from the original movie. I
was going to say, is this in the stage show, this kind of or is this the film? Because I know that some changes.
It's in the stage show as well. It's in the stage show as well. I mean, let's do that ridiculous thing that reviewers shouldn't do, which is rewrite the film into what you'd like it to be. But I've always thought that it would be far more satisfying if at the end of Act 1, Elphaba's problem with the wizard was that he wasn't magical, rather than he was slaughtering animals.
Yes.
Because I can get there with that character, because the character believes in this wizard so much, and she believes in these magical solutions so much. When she's presented with someone who is essentially quite a kind ruler, but not a wizard, there is no magic powering him. I could see that fueling her rage, and there's legs in a story about someone trying to tell the population that something that's actually quite good is based on a lie, and wanting, who's the artist's album that's called "Do You Want the Truth or Something Beautiful"? I think it might be Polona Faith, right? But that line, do you want the truth or something beautiful? So do you want hard facts, or do you want things to just be good and work? I could see that working, but it goes too far too quickly and be too beyond the pale for us to kind of play with that. I'm ranting, so I'll stop. Thoughts.
No. But the point is that all makes perfect sense. But as you say, the film then can't get away from the fact that it creates this character, or maybe it visualizes that character from the stage show in a different way through kind of animal cruelty. It's not just even animal cruelty, because you're supposed to. This is the thing. It uses animals. It uses animals to talk about a kind of denial or a loss of humanity. So it's a very short bit where I can't remember the character's name. Is it Dillimad? The sort of little
Dr. Dillimand, yeah.
Dillimand, yeah. Where Elphaba discovers that there is this. This flying monkey reveals behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz that there is this sort of room that has all of these animals that are being kind of captured and slaughtered and put to death and all this kind of stuff. Denied humanity. And anyway, but that then is visualised, interestingly, through a sort of a loss of anthropomorphic qualities, insofar as the character can't speak, retreats back into sort of bestiality, what Wells calls that kind of bestial ambivalence, where suddenly the character is unable to speak through words. It retreats into animalness, and I found that kind of quite interesting, because it's a very kind of throwaway narrative plot point, but it uses animals to talk about populations that are denied humanity. And we've talked and the category of the human, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, where the category of the human is implicated. It is a kind of strategy. It's a tactic. It is about, in the true wizard fashion and the true Morrible fashion, it's that we need people to point at. We need to be able to point at. It's Morrible changing the headline, or changing the cloud writing that says, to sort of create the illusion that it's the Wicked Witch of the West who's the kind of true villain. Oz needs someone to point at. That's the whole film in a nutshell. I teach a module that looks at necropolitics. So Achille Mbembe's work on necropolitics, which is it builds off of Foucault's work on biopower. So biopower. Well, Foucault's writing on biopower is about the regulation of different kinds of populations. So, state control over health, reproduction, life itself. Let's say there are certain structures within the world that are about regulating populations. And Mbembe's work pushes this forward and basically says that there is a necropower at work in the world that hinges on the power to decide who gets to live and who must die. It is exercised through certain kinds of violence, systemic violence, and the creation of, quote, death worlds. You get this a lot in kind of with geographers. They talk about sacrifice zones, bodies that are already at risk, bodies that are worth saving, bodies that are disposable. So suddenly humanity becomes this kind of quite disposable kind of category. Now, I've been really interested in necropolitics in the way that it relates to kind of franchises, especially the Marvel films, because it makes quite clear decisions on who must live, or who gets to live, and who must die. And obviously franchises themselves love bringing people back. There's also an extra kind of political level here, which is the kind of structures of Hollywood. Who gets to make films? Who doesn't get to make films? Whose films are lauded, whose films are like the backlash against the Marvels film, The Marvels, directed by a black woman and featuring all female kind of protagonists. That was critiqued in a way that other films that make less money were not, and all this kind of stuff. So there's something about necropolitics and the franchise that I'm interested in and specifically in Marvel, which is all about who can die when you snap your fingers. And I think it goes back to your work on the blog that you wrote for the website about the inconsequentiality of franchises, that kind of stuff. So there's something. So as I was watching, I wrote necropolitics because essentially this guy is making wizard is making decision. He's creating these Oz is now this death world where there are decisions to be made about how modern sovereignty exercises power through the control of life and death. This is beyond Foucault's biopolitics. This is creating zones of death where certain bodies are deemed disposable, and you have it with the animals, but you also have it with the Munchkins, where Bok wants to leave Oz but can't because he doesn't have his papers. Essentially, he doesn't have the papers that allow him to leave the country or leave the land, or so the animals are an intensified, quite violent articulation of kind of some of the other stuff that's bubbling. It causes the ostracization of Elphaba. It causes the fervour of these crowds. It causes the Bok to not be able to kind of leave Oz. So the book is really interesting, but it's about inequality and terror, but it's also about bodies that are deemed disposable, bodies that are put to death, bodies that and so I found that interesting. All of that is totally incompatible with some of the stuff that the film is trying to do elsewhere. Like, that is as you said, I don't know how it does that in a film like this. Like, I don't know how it can do both of those things at once. It's light and airy and like a bubble on the one hand, and it's very grounded and political on the other, and it kind of lurches wildly between, like Man United's form this season, wildly inconsistent.
We'll talk about your manager after. Anyway, yes, I don't think it's necessarily a choice between doing something political and doing something comedic. It's a choice of where the target of the politics is, because the film sets itself up. The play sets itself up with the task of showing us the iconic images of the Wicked Witch of the West and Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, pink bubble fairy princess, and quote-unquote evil green black clad witch. And it asks us to go, this image needs further context. And this is back to your behind the curtain thing, right?
Yeah.
And its sole job should be laser focused on bringing us to a point where we see dark in the good and we see good in the dark. That's literally some of the lyrics of the movie, right? It completely gets us to a point by the end of the first act where we see some of that. But what it then does is it one becomes less focused, and two kind of over eggs the problem. So what we end up doing is, it's not a question of there is no such thing as good and bad. There is a flawed, compromised world with different levels of a compromised agency and different decisions. There is bad in Glinda. There is bad in absolute goodness, and there is good in absolute badness. To the point where actually we just flipped it. So, like, there is absolute goodness. It's just we didn't. It was the Green Witch. You know, that's the absolute good character that does no wrong by the end of the movie. You know, it doesn't. By the end of the movie, we're not asked to call into question any of her hot-headedness, her lack of compromise, because why would we when the stakes are this high with these animals? And in the same way that the wizard is just wicked and Morrible is just wicked, like, you know. So it's kind of guilty of failing its own logic in that it does still subscribe to an idea of wickedness. It's just we got who was wicked wrong. We should have been pointing over there, not over there. Shouldn't the message be we shouldn't be pointing at anyone? Like, you know.
Because I think that goes back to my point about the I wouldn't be happier number, where I've written they don't seem to believe the words that they're singing, which is yes. I mean, there's some interesting stuff that the film does around kind of pretense, as I said, and falsification and fake and all that kind of stuff. Yes, it's fake news. Yeah, like I get that people will believe what you tell them and all that kind of stuff. But I just didn't buy when Elphaba. So it's just after. I think it's not that far after it cuts into the events of the Wizard of Oz. So Nessa Rose is killed, and that starts the events of the original film. Like we get that, and then she has a music. I think it's the moment where Elphaba basically says, "Okay, so I'm going to be wicked." So Fiyero is sort of made to stand to feel like he's in love with Elphaba. They have a very odd romantic, you know, that's a very odd scene because it looks like they've never kissed anyone ever before in their life. But anyway, that was an interesting.
Yeah.
That was an
Yeah,
interesting.
and then
moment in
suddenly,
the film.
as my partner who I saw the movie pointed
know what
out,
you're gonna
I
say.
think it's
I know
become
what
a
you're gonna
meme.
say.
The cardigan,
Yeah.
the sexy Elphaba cardigan weird bit, and yeah. Anyway,
and it kind of cuts, and they're just under a tree and topless. Anyway, so there's that.
Anyway,
but then she has a kind of number where she essentially says, "Okay, so I'm going to be." No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah.
I'm going to be wicked. I just didn't buy that. I thought I just didn't buy it. I just didn't get the relinquish. She says almost 10 minutes before, I am going to, spend the rest of my life stopping you, bad the wizard even says, let me explain. She says, no, now I know what I'm supposed to do. About 10 minutes later, she's like, so I'm wicked. So that's...
Yes,
and
but what does that mean?
Gives it away.
Because it doesn't mean anything, does it? Like, she doesn't do anything different.
No, exactly. So I don't know what she's trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, if the film were interested in really pushing this, what it needs to do is it claims that, its target is largely the kind of simple-minded, quote-unquote, population of Oz that just believes simple narratives. So what it should do is have the strength of its convictions to present us with a flawed Elphaba and a flawed Glinda, who we both like and see problems in. And that's the ending, right? But it doesn't want to do that because it ultimately does want us to root for the goodies and hunt out the baddies. To talk about songs, I think that song's actually all right. This is not a point we need to dwell on a lot, but the songs aren't as good in the second half.
No, that's it. It's a musical. It's a musical where the songs aren't as good.
That's good. Of the one song everyone is paying up to see, and the one song that was any good in the stage show is the climactic "For Good" number, which doesn't work as well on the screen. I'm not quite sure how you'd have made it work well, but in the stage show, it's literally like a kind of almost a pop concert staged kind of thing. Not like it looks like a pop concert, but it's the two performers standing there on stage in close up, singing out to the audience and to each other, right? Very simply. It's a theatrical moment in a good way. How you stage that in a film and it doesn't look just kind of visually inert, I'm not really sure, and nor does what's his name who directed the movie,
John M. Chu.
Yeah, nor does John M. Chu. And the solution he comes up with his fade edits. Anyway, but that number oddly is both successful musically, it's a good number, but if you think about the lyrics are singing a song about a film we didn't watch, because the whole thing of that is who's to say if I've been changed for the better, but I've been changed by you, right? Our because we know each other, because we have bonds and ties, because we have had our paths are different. It's what's that about? It's about, I don't know, community, or it's about intersubjectivity, or it's about the complexity of individual agency versus whatever that's about. What it isn't about is that you're the goodie, I'm the baddie. Oh God, the baddie. It's about, it keeps saying, who's to say if I've been changed for the better? That's the gag it's making. But that's not the film we've just seen. That's not what it's... the film isn't saying that. The film is saying that they definitely have been changed for the better. They're definitely nice people, don't worry, and they'll defeat the baddies.
I was going back to something you said about... When I said about the kind of... Elphaba now wants to be wicked, or says... kind of succumbs and says... And you said... Yeah, but what does that mean? So I was thinking, okay, to put a very, very strained / positive spin on this. One of the things that I noticed a lot more this time was the words, the language, the Ozian words, confusifying, disgustified, braverism, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. I'm assuming they are in the original text and also in the stage show and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it made me think about the way that language is sort of used, and it's like that. It's like they don't know what the characters don't know what they're saying. So it makes, as in they're making up these words, these portmanteau words, this sort of James Joyce style gobbledygook. So I'm just not gobbledygook, but you know what I mean. So I'm just wondering, does that then make perfect sense that characters would use words like wicked without really knowing what they mean? and just sort of going along with the spin of it all, the whole, to use the image of the film, the sort of tornado of spinning, how they just kind of go along with stuff, and because and I think you said at the start, it's a difference between what some people see and what others don't see, but it seems to be there's a real kind of frivolity, I think, with language where the characters are just like, well, I've heard this, so I'll just repeat it. But that's also not to say that the film isn't interested in how those things can actually do damage. That superficiality to language can also. So I'm just trying to think of is there any positive? Yeah, is there any positive way that you can say it makes perfect sense that Elphaba would give herself the label of wicked? Because a couple of times before that, the word wicked is used. I think it's when Fiyero is being captured and sort of beaten down to the ground, and Glinda says something like, "Oh, don't do that. He's hurting. It's very wicked of you," or something like that. It's like and I think again it goes back to the point. I mean, it's like the characters don't really know what they're saying, and know what they're singing, but it sort of makes sense or is justified by a film where everything is very. It's not artificial is not the right word, but it's just people just say things. People just say things without really, and even the spell, the Grimmery, where isn't it Nessa Rosa just sort of says when Bok is turned into a Tin Man, she's just sort of gobbledygooking. It's about words, it's about language, and she says, Elphaba says, I don't know what you're saying, I don't know what words that you're using. So it's a bit rubbish of an analogy, but kind of the power of words, but it's about what it means to give somebody a label, not really think about what that means, and I don't know, something around language. I think that's a good point actually about the. I think the film doesn't know is the slightly hard answer, but I think that's a good point. I also think what's she doing in that moment? Is she claiming a slur as hers? Is that what she's doing? Because that doesn't really fit with the narrative, because that's not what she's in the moment. She's emotive and she's turning her back on the world because they've killed the man she loves. So that doesn't really fit with that, right? Or is she like, I am wicked, I'm denouncing this world, and I'm the only one that sees things the right way, and I'm just going, to hell with all of you. In which case, what does she do next? She doesn't really do anything different. She just, that's it. What does she flies around on her broomstick a lot. And God does it love showing us that. That is where it thinks that's your cinema there. Don't you worry, everyone. This isn't just a theatre show. There's broomsticks. It's flying around. We had a little bit of it in the first film. Oh my God, you're going to get a lot of it in the second film. Because to be honest, we don't know how else to pad out this ropey narrative. So here's some flying scenes. Yes.
But there's no character arc, is there? She starts defiant and rebellious and righteous and against the world, and in love with Jonathan Bailey, and that's how she ends it. In fact, she doesn't end it that way. She ends by just running away.
I suppose the film in that sense is kind of hamstrung a little bit by it's got to get to the end of the film. It's got to get us to a point where conceivably you could watch The Wizard of Oz straight afterwards, and you go, oh yeah, that's the same character. So it can't really do much with the.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're absolutely right. But now I'm going to have to do my prequel rant. You've said that sentence quite a few times, and she, it's got to get us here. She has to do this to get us here, and I think that is the essential problem with this bit of the film, this entire story, is that it's all let's get from A to B because that's the way it happens in The Wizard of Oz. Mm-hmm. And there's no sense of logic. There's no sense of, if you really told this story in a way that was consistent, this is what you would do. None of that matters because it is all superseded by this desire to give us these moments of, that's how the Tin Man was made. And I hate it when prequels do that. I don't understand what the appeal is. I mean, you described it as a puzzle movie, so I guess that would make sense. like, I guess that would make sense. The problem with that is that it's a puzzle movie for people who've never seen The Wizard of Oz or haven't seen it for a while. Or aren't that interested in The Wizard of Oz because they, because they've seen it once and they sort of vaguely remember. Because the problem with what you just said is it's got to get you to the point where you can watch the movie and it all ties together. Except you can't, because if you then watch The Wizard of Oz, you think, sorry, why is the Tin Man behaving like this? Because shouldn't he be like trying, like, why does he take an axe to the Wicked Witch in one scene? Why is the well, no, not the Tin Man. Sorry, I'm confusing my things. Why is the Tin Man behaving like this for other reasons? Why is the Scarecrow behaving like this? Why does the Wicked Witch set him on fire at one point? Like, none of it works narratively, character-wise, thematically. You hate all the people in it because you've just had it done damage. So I don't understand that fantasy of let's get us to the point where we can seamlessly watch the original movie, because to do that you've done so much damage to the mythology of the original movie. I mean, not to mention that I'm not going to go all insane and geeky, but like actually all these characters do have backstories. They're not in the MGM film, but like if you were a Oz fan, there are backstories, and they're far more interesting and whimsical and make a lot more sense within the context of where they're told than the ones presented here. Because I'm sorry, why would you turn someone into a Tin Man to solve that problem? Oh my god, he's in trouble, turn him into a scarecrow. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's it doesn't make any sense if you haven't seen the film that it's alluding to. And if you have seen the film it alludes to, it may make sense narratively, but it doesn't make sense thematically or emotionally. So why does the damage has still been done? Like,
well, in terms of turning someone into a Tin Man, the film is very interested in different ways that it can treat wronged men. It's just like, this man has been wronged, and so we'll just turn him into a. So it doesn't really. Yeah, it's a bit. My question was actually going to be:
yes.
Is there a sense in which the film is trying to say, look, at no point were we trying to be that sincere about getting us to the point where you could pick up the Wizard, or is it instead saying, look, this is just a different spin on, this is a film that's interested in subjectivity, and we talked about this in the podcast, subjectivity, allegiance and alignment, and in a world that by exploring the world of Oz, we are giving, and we're going to do it through different perspectives and different points of view and different characters to focus on, and different, is it trying to sort of say, look, we're not going to promise that we're going to get you to a point where you can watch The Wizard of Oz, and we're not promising you that kind of consistency. We're giving you something instead. Like, is it I'm not positive on the film, but I'm just trying to sort of think about ways in which it's saying, okay, you can only judge a film on what it's trying to do, and is it just simply interested in the moving parts of The Wizard of Oz, and it pushes some to the periphery and it brings some to the fore, and it's kind of interested in the front and backstageness of those potential relationships, rather than it being a kind of true. It's not a true prequel in that sense, but it's doing some of the work of the prequel. Maybe the first film does the work. As I said, the first film does the prequel work better than the second, I think, because the second has got to, if it's going to follow its own logic, it's got to try and do a lot more, and it doesn't get us to the point where we can pick up and watch The Wizard of Oz. But maybe therefore it's trying to do something different with the pieces of the world of Oz.
I think you used the word perspective a few times there, and I think that's it, right? The first film, through the entire 2.5 hour running time, minus probably some bits, is interested in getting us to a point where the film ends, the stage show ends with that shot of the Wicked Witch on her broomstick, kind of, riding into the camera, which is echoing the shot from The Wizard of Oz. And it asks us to see that moment through a different perspective, where what we are looking at is not some vindictive evil witch, but someone who has been hurt, who has righteous fury, and it's about her rather than about what it says about anyone else. And that's incredibly successful in that first bit. And it's all about what we've been talking about, looking at something through a different lens, seeing something from a new perspective by gaining new information and foregrounding some characters and backgrounding other characters. The issue is that it never does that again with any other moment in the Wizard of Oz, because all the other moments it wants to play with, it actually doesn't change perspectives, it changes facts. It doesn't go look at this scene from a different angle. It goes, if we go over here and look at this angle, we actually see it's a completely different scene. There's actually a trap door there, and she didn't die, and that guy actually wasn't like that, and to me that's not clever. It's an exercise. Maybe that is what they're trying to do, but it's not clever. You could do that with any pop lore feature. The skill of the prequel is in finding these ellipses in the original text and filling them in a way either that satisfies the original creative intent or your own creative intent. There is something still fundamentally interesting about, taking what's the kind of Uber prequel, it's Phantom Menace, taking the kind of quintessential mysterious black-hearted villain and introducing him as a young boy, and going, how did we get from there to there? There's something interesting about that, and it helps us to see things in a different way. But what isn't interesting is just trying to explain things that don't need explaining, or trying to showcase intelligence by uprooting things that don't need uprooting. The skill is to make the Wicked Witch still a wicked witch whilst we see her not as a wicked witch. Not to go, actually, she wasn't even a wicked witch. She didn't even live in that castle. She'd only just arrived when Dorothy got there.
So I was a bit confused by the end of the film, just simply because I was trying to. I don't know my Oz lore, so I know the bits. I know when it's being a prequel. I know when it's being superimposed onto the original film. But I was confused, because in my mind, I've got the Wicked Witch of the West dying with a pail of water thrown over her in the 1939 film. So this does happen in this, but does Wicked Part 2 end after the events of the Wizard of Oz? Like, does it take us beyond that?
Yes, kind of very briefly, like the next couple of days. I think we find out that she didn't die, that her and Fiera escaped through like a trap door, and it was all a kind of illusion, and they're now wandering in the kind of wilderness beyond Oz. And go on.
But was that faking of the death? Is that the same death that we see supposedly in the original Wizard of Oz?
I think that's meant to be what it's implied. Why? What did you take?
That's what. Yeah. No, I thought. Okay, so have I got my kind of chronologies wrong? And that's, she's faked her death, and now the original Wizard of Oz will pick up after. So I was trying to figure out whether there was a second incident with a pail of water. Essentially, that's where I was like. Okay,
I think. I mean, listeners, write in if I'm wrong, but I think what it's saying is, if that camera that shot Julie Garland had just kept running for a bit longer, we would have seen Elphaba climb out and run away.
Okay, so that's what I feared. In which case, that's the. Do you remember that really kind of iconic, canonical classical Hollywood death? Yeah. Well, that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. That thing that you kind of that got you interested in this film in the first place didn't happen. Yeah. Wasn't even actually didn't even have a green face. It was all makeup. That's
the thing where I'm. Yeah, that's what I feared, because I thought, okay, so that's a cop out at the end there to do that with that iconic kind of ending, or that iconic kind of death of the Wicked Witch of the West that's been imitated so many times and all that stuff. So that's what I mean about, I think it's successful when it's a prequel, and it's happening before the events of the Wizard of Oz. I liked some of the allusions to events, like the building, as I said, of the Yellow Brick Road, and the sort of allusions to kind of Dorothy, and some of the superimpositions that it's making. It then gets less successful when it tries to push beyond that world, because I think it's got to stand on its own 2 feet, and I don't think it's good enough to do that. It's all fine when it's using another film as a crutch, but ultimately the other film runs out, and then we've got this. What we're left with is this film that has to then do something with some of these characters, and it's not kind of strong enough maybe in its final moments to be able to do that. So
I'll say it before, but I'll say it on the podcast. You could take For Good, the song, out of this movie. You could put it just before Defying Gravity in the first movie, and you could stop there, and you would have a far more successful, far more interesting prequel that could be easily run into The Wizard of Oz, that has all, as I say, compare the way in which it deals with the image of the Wicked Witch on the broom versus the way it deals with the Wicked Witch melting. That is the difference between these two movies. One augments, complements, critiques without destroying, adds to, acknowledges the changing in times, does all these kind of fun, interesting things with this iconic image of pop culture, and the other one goes, ta-da! It's not like that at all. And those are the two movies. Those are the two acts of the play epitomised. Yeah.
My only other, I don't have anything else to add other than my only other thought was sort of, you alluded to it there, which is I wonder if the kind of cut, I can see why they cut, because the play cuts with Defying Gravity at the end, and I'm sort of wondering what parts of this does it cut too soon? Does it cut too late? And I think it's my problem with the way that the film starts, and so I'm just trying to figure out what parts of this film could be moved into the. I'd rather have 20 minutes of a longer first film, I think, with some of this stuff put in. Because I just don't think the second half is as strong. Essentially, the second film is strong.
And oddly, and I remember saying this when we did the first film. I remember saying it's 2.5 hours long, so it's longer than the first half of the stage play by A Country Mile. In fact, it's longer. It's about as long as the entire thing. And I couldn't think what had been added by doing that. And I would apply the same thing to this. And I tried to go in with an open mind, because I held out that maybe with a bit more narrative room to breathe, some of these problems could be, at the very least, diluted. But actually, it goes back to I think is it the Mark Kermode Mark Kermode makes this gag about the Tarkovsky Solaris, which is 3 hours long, and the George Clooney remake of Solaris, which is an hour and a half. And he hates both of the movies equally, but his argument is that the Clooney one is twice as good because it's half as long. In the sense that a bad movie half as long is better than a long movie that's still bad. And so by making me sit there for 2.5 hours to watch a thing that I didn't enjoy when it was only an hour, did not help. And I don't know how they did that, because I'm not quite sure how they didn't add anything to that by doubling its length. Other than the kind of, new songs to sell the soundtrack and probably get an Oscar nomination.
Well, sure. But before we go, do you feel like you've satisfied? You said that Jonathan Bailey was on your list. I mean, is there anything that
Jonathan Bailey's no good in this movie. And he was great in the first movie, but again, that's the tonal shift, right? He's kind of weird and charismatic and a bit cheesy and camp in the first movie, and he's just really sincere and dull, and gets a bit, who's the Nicholas? It gets a bit Nicholas Sparks, kind of Oz, and I've not seen him in Bridgerton, but apparently he's more like that in Bridgerton, which makes me not that interested in seeing more of his oeuvre. But I can't say that word, and I don't really have any more to say about that. But he's no good either.
Okay. No, I think you said something about the kind of it mistakes sort of the lack of mirth for being kind of insubstantial, or it sort of doesn't quite know where to pitch itself, which I think we discussed was a fault of the first film. Ultimately, there is stuff in the first film that makes the cut and is successed, but I still the tonal stuff is still the problem for me. And I think obviously this is all wrapped around the fact this is wrapped around the fact this is a musical, and we've mentioned it only briefly, but you say the songs aren't as good, but there is a sort of expectation around what do we want from a musical, and I'm not entirely sure I want some of this stuff from a musical. I think that's it. The genre element is really important here. There are. This is not the entertainment and utopia described by Richard Dyer. This is something else, and musicals can work. One of my favourite musicals, It's Always Fair Weather, is not a quote classic upbeat musical. It's about returning war veterans who are trying to struggle to find their place in society. I'm not sure I want a contemporary Hollywood musical based on the mythology of the Wizard of Oz to be making some. I think you said some of these decisions, some of these bad decisions, but. Some people liked it, lots of people liked it, and it was very successful.
Well, well, it was very successful. I'd be interested to hear how many people liked it. It didn't get as well reviewed. Well, that is always very important when one does film history and when one, box office does not mean popularity. Lots of people kind of will watch Avatar. But that's why it's so good in the box office is that I am one of these people that has no interest and will not go to the cinema to see the new Avatar movie. But it's one of these things that people just sort of vaguely will go and see, not necessarily because they want to, but because it won't offend them. Box office does not mean time well spent. But I am sorry to be grumpy about it. I did really want to kick off the new year going, do you know what? They fixed it. I didn't know how they were going to fix it, but they fixed it, and it turns out they didn't know how they were going to fix it either, so they didn't. My advice would be to go back and re-listen to part 1, and if you enjoyed that episode more, that's the problem, isn't it? Go back to part 1 and just stay there. On that note, right. So yes, we've got plenty of episodes coming up that are already in the can. You will hear us all throughout the new year. Happy 2026 to everybody, plenty of coming out. We're going to have discussions on all kinds of things. So stay tuned, as well as footnotes throughout the year. You can of course contact us, get involved in the conversation at fantasy-animation.org. You can also do it via our social media channels at Fananim Research, FANANIM Research, and you can email us at fananimresearch@gmail.com. Let me know what I missed and why actually part 2 is better than part 1, or don't, one of the two. But otherwise, we'll see you next time for better or for worse.
Bye.